Thank you. Okay, I'm the last person, and oh my God, it's cold. Like, just a quick funny joke. Do we think this is a scarf or a shawl or a blanket? Like, what do we think? Blanket? Okay. I've had it for a year. My aunt gave it to me, and I'm never quite sure. So, whatever. It's all of those things. I'll just start off with a quick quote that I'm sure many of you have heard. And the most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. It's by Alice Walker. This is a tough topic to talk about, bystander intervention, but there's a lot of things that I will say. But before that, I mean, I'm gonna be just so honest here and talk a little bit about how I'm feeling in this after Me Too moment and just what happened. I'm feeling really raw about it, I'm gonna be real. I feel anger, I feel a lot of anger, and I just really wanna challenge a lot of people in this room, and myself included, we all just really need to do better. I mean, we can point the fingers at one person or the next person, but I've been in this game for a while now, a little while, like 10 plus years, you know, I've considered myself an activist and I've cared about these issues, and I really want everyone in this room to care as well. I'm angry at white women. I'm sorry to say that, but I am. All y'all have not stood up. And I'm glad that you finally have when it felt safe for you, for some of you when you have a proper career. But I feel like some of you have really been standing back and watching a lot of this shit go down and not saying anything about it. And I'm angry and upset about that. And I guess I never really thought about how angry I was until you know, all this Harvey Weinstein stuff came forward and we saw who it was who was at the front of that. So I got that out of the way, but I believe that we all can do better. I believe that theater is a space for us all to be better people, because I think that's what we all want. I want to first acknowledge a few things actually, is that a lot of what we're talking about comes from a legacy that we cannot ignore of colonial violence, of misogyny and white supremacy and capitalism that rules. So much of this has to do with all of that stuff, and that is the ugly root of what we are talking about. Christina did a land acknowledgement, and I don't mind acknowledging that I'm a settler on this land. I'm a black woman of color, and I don't know, I think that is the root of so much of why we are here in terms of talking about the violence that was done to Indigenous people and is still being done on a regular basis. So we all actually have a collective opportunity and obligation, as far as I'm concerned, to address that stuff as well. So, bystander intervention, let's go there. I am really interested in systemic change. And I'm not interested in the prison industrial complex, and I'm not interested in a bunch of punishments, but that's probably what we've got, the framework that we've got to deal with right now. I want to acknowledge Indigenous frameworks and leadership models that exist on this land, some of which, from what I know, are very much based on women being in the lead, based on cooperation and not always, based on treaties, based on many things. And I want to acknowledge that those exist and have existed and exist all over the world in different ways. And we're really talking about and doing white colonial violence here. I want to also acknowledge Insight, which is a group of women of color in the States who have been talking about restorative justice probably for the last 25 years. And those frameworks exist because they too are women of color, black women mainly, who came forward and said, we don't want violence anymore, and we're gonna come up with frameworks to undo that. So I really encourage all of you to go and look up Insight and see what restorative justice is about, because it's really important for us all as theater practitioners, and myself included, to think about the fact that we actually haven't even thought about these things until now. We haven't really thought about conflict in the in the rehearsal room, we've really been focused on getting stuff done and just being like, we're gonna get this thing up, we're gonna get it done, and then we think about the issues that happen after the fact. When in fact, there's been people for a long time who've been thinking about violence and thinking about how to undo these things, and we are not reinventing the wheel here. We really should go and find out what those people are doing and how it was effective. All right. Bystander intervention, as far as I'm concerned, is harm reduction. So when I talk about harm reduction, I think we all kind of know what that means. Basically, reducing the harm. And what I really want is systemic change. I don't want to keep going back to harm reduction strategies. However, this is where we're at. So, according to a New York Times article, thank you, that Christina sent me, bystander reduction does work. It works. It's probably one of the few things that work. Training doesn't seem to work as much. A bunch of other things don't work, but it can work. So what that means is that we all have the power to do something, and that if you do something, it will have a positive effect. It works in military situations, which gross, but hey, it's a proper statistic. They've looked at it. They've empowering themselves within the US Army for military folks to intervene. It works inside of university situations where we all know consent on campus is a big topic that is being discussed. So it works. For me, I've thought about this a lot, and because I think it's something that beyond the containers, which is a great word, of our rehearsal rooms, I think we all need to cultivate courage all the time. Because I don't think that you can just show up at a rehearsal room and suddenly you're going to be courageous. I want everyone to internally think about on a regular basis how you can be a courageous, kind, generous person, because if you're not that person outside of the rehearsal room, you're not going to be that person inside of the rehearsal room. And unfortunately, especially with the frameworks that we've got, we often don't have a lot of time, you're not gonna learn it there. So you gotta learn this now, and I'm glad we're all in this room together to learn it. The first thing to even think about is, so the moment happens, and it's something that I'm really grappling with a lot, is whatever this moment might be. We all know it when something just has gone wrong, someone said something, an approach is happening that we don't like. Maybe we might look at our fellow people in the room being like, oh, like this is not going well, whatever it is. And we're just like, so it's like, okay, do I say something or do I not say something? Of course I'm gonna say something. I'm also gonna say it's a hard thing to do because you're like, I feel like our society has taught us not to say something, but the fact is the moment is already poisoned, so things have already gone to shit anyway. And to think that it's true, to think that you not saying anything now is somehow going to make it better, it's already gone to shit. And in fact, what's gonna happen later, I find, is that I'm stuck now with the trauma of not having said something, or that nobody said something. And then maybe even years later, you see that person at the bar and you remember that terrible moment that happened in rehearsal and nobody did anything and we're all traumatized anyway. So, since we're all traumatized anyway, we might as well do something, right? I know, even on the subway where you're like, oh my God, this person is having maybe a mental health episode and going off. Oh, if I don't say something, I can't say something, it's already dangerous. You're like, well, we're already traumatized by it, so someone better step up and it might as well be you. I'm going to admit, though, that it can be really, really hard to do this because, as we've talked about, fear of reprisal is so real. Depending on who you are in the room, we should really acknowledge that, we have 5 minutes left? On time? Okay, perfect. Okay, good. We should really acknowledge the power dynamics in the room. So certainly, as a Black woman, who maybe doesn't work a lot, let's be real, I might not feel as empowered to stand up for somebody as somebody who is a more senior white woman artist or a senior male artist in the room. So acknowledge the power dynamics that exist and acknowledge what you can do, that you have the power to do something, or maybe you don't. So first thing I would say is to take a breath, take a breath, and really think about it. Really think about what's happening here and what you can do about it, if anything. And then decide to act, decide to do something. As I said, the moment's already poisoned, so we can't go back. We can't turn back, it's already happened. A big thing too is then to assess the risk. So, okay, as I said, I'm like, okay, who am I in this room? In a recent rehearsal process, as an example, I was a more senior person in that room. I had more experience. So if I were to say something, it's gonna mean something, and I made a point of thinking about that and assessing that risk of whether I should say something, how that should go down. These are some approaches adapted from Hollaback, which I highly recommend that you check out. I think it's some links that I've sent. And they're concerned, an organization concerned with stopping street harassment, but I feel like these approaches can definitely apply to our rehearsal, to our performance contexts. So they call, this is Hollaback, I have to like keep attributing this. My partner gets really mad when I don't do this. She's like, you didn't attribute it. So I'm like, okay, attribute, be proper. So the first thing is they have the 4 Ds. The first one is called direct. So how to intervene. So the first approach would be directly to say something. Say something, do something. So someone says something like, it could be innocuous, you know, we could be a microaggression. For instance, the other day, someone was like, okay, let's have a powwow. You know what I mean? And we're all like, some people like, ugh. You could just be like, hey, by the way, powwow's not a good word to use. Maybe we should do something about that. So as an example, that's one way to directly address something. So just be direct and say something immediately. And if something's happening in rehearsal that you don't like, you can be like, hey, by the way, I don't think that's right. Or I think we need a fight choreographer here. Or can we talk about intimacy choreography as an example? I think that might be needed. This is an example of a way that we like, can, in a rehearsal situation as an example, directly confront something that's happening. Another thing, so I would say the direct is the highest risk. Is the highest risk thing that you can do because you're putting yourself out there, and the repercussions could happen, and you will feel them. So that's direct. Distract. So this is a more medium risk thing. So maybe you feel like in a room or wherever we are that you're not in a position to be able to say something, or you don't feel comfortable saying something, but you want to do something. So this is, I think, a really good one for us to really think about as well, especially those of us who feel like, okay, we're younger actors or we don't have as much power in the room. So do something unrelated. As an example, you could be like, okay, something's kind of going wrong in rehearsal here. Stage manager, I need a break. Can we take a break? Something, you know what I mean? Do something in that moment that maybe isn't completely addressing that particular instance that's happening, but something that will stop the dynamic so that we maybe have a little bit of time to come up with a different approach because things have gone to shit. So that's a medium risk something. This also, in terms of talking about like in public situations, talking about the subway or wherever we might be, because you never know, you might end up with our castmates at a bar example, someone's getting hit on inappropriately, and you're like, I need to get her out of this situation. Be like, hey girl, let's go to the bathroom, let's go get a drink. Like stuff like that is a great example of like, let's distract from the situation and stop the dynamic so that we can come up with something better. Another thing also very useful, I think, for our situations is to delegate. So this is to ask someone else to intervene, maybe a stage manager, maybe it's the director, maybe the director wasn't there, when such and such went down, or maybe if you're dealing with a theater that has a proper administrative structure, it might be to be like, I'm gonna call the managing director, I'm gonna call the artistic director, I'm gonna call somebody, and I'm gonna say something went down, I didn't like it, I wasn't necessarily a part of it, but I was there, and I'm gonna ask you to intervene. We're gonna come up with a strategy about how we intervene. This also, to bring it back, because I also, I'm on Equities Council as well, is kind of the not in our space, one of those things where you can call the resident respectful workplace advisor. So this is another type of medium risk delegation thing that you can do. You can call someone and be like, something happened that I didn't like, can you help me? So this is a medium risk thing you can do. One of the lowest risk things we can do, and sometimes for me, one of the most frustrating, but maybe necessary, is delay and support. So what that means is that after the incident, so something's gone wrong and you're like, it's over, whatever it is. And so maybe after you might check in with the person and being like, hey, are you okay? Like, that didn't feel good. do you want me to do something about that? Or how did you feel about that? So that's checking in basically after the incident has happened. That's the lowest risk thing you can do, but as we all can acknowledge, it's better than nothing. For me, it's hard when the delay or support comes up, because then I'm like, oh, so you saw something happen as well and you didn't do anything and you left me there. So, and I find, sorry white women, but some of you really can, that is often your tactic. You know what I mean? You're like, oh, that racist thing happened, I'm sorry, girl. And I'm like, but you didn't say anything in the moment and you kind of left me out to dry. And so I want this audience to do better than that one, but sometimes in very dangerous situations, that's all you've got, and I can acknowledge that. But I want everyone in this room to do better than that, because that is, I think, especially as Canadians, that is our default, is to be like, oh, after the fact, oh, that didn't go well, but I just sat there and didn't do anything about it. And so that happens. So yes, so I think those are some tactics we can really discuss in terms of talking about bystander intervention. Just some final thoughts that I'll leave with is that, you know, I don't think we can be even bystanders anymore. Like, I don't think we can turn back now. We can't. Things have already just, I can feel that there's a shift, and that's actually a really, really good thing. But we cannot go back to people standing by and watching things happen, whoever you are. Men especially, you really can't. If you care, you need to stand up and say something. I'm not gonna say that you're part of the problem necessarily, because you didn't do it. You know what I mean? You aren't the Arbelt Schultz of the world. But you've seen bullies like him, and you didn't do anything. So we really can't go back. I also just wanna leave on a positive note and say, I'm really thinking about, and this is something that comes up at Equity, Jane Heyman, who's a wonderful person who you guys all should know about, a director on Equity Council and an elder in our industry, is always talking about what is it that we want to create, you know, and I really think, myself included, we haven't put enough thought into our rehearsal rooms when we kind of just hire everyone and throw them in and hope for the best. And I really think we need to be a lot more visionary and a lot more proactive about the rooms that we want to create, using words that I like joy, affirmation. Obviously, we want the risk-taking. But we really need to think about, okay, when stuff comes up, how are we going to deal? How are we going to deal with conflicts? Because those are going to come up. How are we going to deal? And I don't feel like I've been given those tools as a theater practitioner yet. And I really hope that we as a community can start to really cultivate that and be a lot more intentional about the spaces we create. Because in the end, as I said, bystander intervention is a harm reduction tactic. We shouldn't have to go there, but sometimes we do. So in the meantime, we really need to invent a whole new paradigm that is about affirmative, joyful spaces, talking about the many steps that Nikki went through as an example, and being really intentional about who we put in the space and how we're gonna work through the shit so that we can get to the beautiful work that we all wanna create. So thank you.